Our subject today is ethics for local governments, ethics for local government agencies, but more importantly, for individuals. Um, as we work for governmental agencies out there, we have to make choices. And sometimes those choices can be hard. They're not really black and white choices, this or that, and this is right, this is wrong. Um, sometimes there may be more than one right choice, and that puts us in a hard situation. And so we want to talk about this subject. And like I said, I prefer to do this in a discussion environment, but that makes it a little harder as we are on the Zoom function. But we'll do our best here today, and I'd love to open up the discussion there. If you have a question or comment, please type it in there. Let's ask some questions to start with, because there are a lot of questions that come around this. Do you consider yourself an ethical person? Now, I think most of us on this call today probably put ourselves in that category. Yeah, I'm an ethical person. I do the right thing. That's really how I go about my decisions in life. I'm going to do the right thing. Okay. Well, let's ask some more questions. Does your organization have an ethics policy? Have you codified, have you put down in writing some ethical decision-making procedures or some specifics about ethics? What is appropriate? Maybe how do we interact with vendors or things like that? And speaking of that, here's another question. Have you ever taken a gift from a vendor? Now, that's an interesting question. And in the government space, it's a little different than it is in the private sector. I worked in the private sector prior to the trust, and a lot of things that were perfectly fine in the private sector are things that are frowned upon, and in some cases illegal in the public sector. So ask yourself the question, you ever taken a gift from a vendor, a hat, a pen, something like that? How about a donut? Maybe you came to the trust training and Mike was doing the training and he had a box of donuts there so you could have refreshment around your training. Did you do anything wrong by taking that donut? Now, I don't believe that we did in that case, but if you made a decision about that, hey, I really like the donuts that Mike brings to his training, and I'm going to make sure that we always are working with the trust based on that donut. Maybe the donut could be a problem, but in most cases that may not be. If that gift changes or affects the choices that you make, it may be an ethical problem. Okay. And we'll talk about a law specific to that as well. You ever gone to lunch with a vendor? What impact did that have on the decisions that you made about that vendor? Now, I take people out to lunch. We're talking about loss prevention. We're talking about safety things, business, and lunches are great places to get business done, to make decisions. We also improve relationships and all of those things over lunch. But what did that lunch mean? So as we go into that, let's just keep that in the back of our mind. Well, what's the definition of ethics then? Well, ethics are rules of behavior based on morals. Wow, we throw morals into this. There are a lot of things that go into ethics as well. But at the end of the day, the definition is it's right versus wrong. And is that the same for every person out there? Does everybody hold the same values when it comes to right versus wrong? Some things are pretty simple. Most people hold similar values there, but we get on edges where we have very different opinions in the same organization. All right. So I'd ask you this question when we start talking about ethics and morals and right and wrong. Where did you learn those things? Where did you build your basis of what is right or wrong. Who taught you that? Were there people in your past that have helped you? Were there organizations that helped you? Um, I think back on my life, who helped me to be the person I am, and to make those decisions over what is right and what is wrong. Um, and I think back to parents and school teachers and people in church and various places. I think the principal at the school helped me on a few of those things where I'd made a bad decision, and the principal helped me out to learn what was right and what was wrong. I think back to an experience when I was a young kid, probably 7 or 8 years old. I was the lucky kid that got to go with my dad to town, left the ranch, took the farm truck, went to town, and dad was going to wash the truck. This was a pretty momentous occasion. It only happened about once a year that truck got washed, and it was going to take some time, but it was time to spend with my father, and so I was excited to go there. We got to the car wash, and dad gets out and he gets a whole pocket full of quarters, and he starts working on washing a year's worth of mud and cow poop and you name it off of that old truck. And I'm a young boy there, with a lot of energy and curiosity, and so I start messing around with the car wash, and I find a vending machine, and that gets me excited because I know that my dad's got a pocket full of quarters because he's got to wash this truck. And when I go and ask my dad, "Hey, can I have a quarter to buy a candy bar?" And that tells you how long ago it was, because it was a quarter for a candy bar. He's going to have a hard time telling me he doesn't have a quarter, because I know he's got a pocket full. And so I go up to my dad and I said, "Dad, can I get a candy bar? There's a vending machine over here." And so he's like, "All right, here you go." And he hands me a quarter, and I go up to the machine, I put my quarter in, and I pull the little knob, and it tips up. If you remember those vending machines, and it drops out the candy bar, and I excitedly pick it out of there and open it up. But while I'm standing there eating my candy bar, my curious mind keeps going, and I reach out and I pull another knob. And guess what happened? Another candy bar came out. And pretty quick, I'm pulling all the knobs. And I've got a whole armful of candy bars. And I go proudly walking up to my father, "Dad, look what I got." And my dad looks at me with kind of a questioning eye, and he's like, "What's going on? I gave you one quarter." And I told him what happened. The machine had jammed up or something, and it's giving out free candy bars. Well, dad stops washing his truck, and we have a talk. And he says, "No, son, that's not right. You didn't pay for those candy bars, and so it's not right that you take those. You need to take those back and put them in I think we just put them back in the vending machine. I don't think we took them and I don't think there was an office there even for that, but we took them back to put them in there." And that stands out in my young mind as a right versus wrong. And you may have similar experiences where you snagged a candy bar at the grocery store, or something like that, and we had that chat. Or there was an instance where something like that happened, where we made a lasting impression, what is right and what is wrong. Okay. Is that the same for everybody? No, not necessarily. Maybe when it comes to stealing, most people have that, but maybe not. Well, let's ask some questions. All right. Here's a statement. Killing is wrong. And I left parentheses there for you to pick the punctuation. What punctuation would you put in after that statement? A period. Period, end of story. Killing is wrong. You may put an exclamation point there. Killing is wrong. You should not ever do that. I really am passionate about that. Some people would put a comma there because I may need a little more information or some explanation onto why killing is wrong, or there may be something else. It may not always be wrong. And some people may have a question mark after that. So that's an interesting thing. If you're one of those people that have a period or an exclamation point there and say killing is wrong, I am dead set against killing, I will throw this next slide up for you. If that mosquito is on your hand, burrowing into your flesh to suck your blood, do you still stand by that statement that killing is wrong? Now, me personally, I grew up in the swamps. And if I see somebody brush a mosquito away, I get angry because I think that every mosquito should die. That's my own moral background on there. Mosquitoes are bad, and I grew up in the swamps, and I dislike them a lot. But does this change your opinion on that statement? Killing is wrong. Well, you may refine that and say, okay, killing people is wrong. All right, will you stand by that? Now I'm going to throw a picture up here of some bad people that did really bad things and murdered people, beheaded people, um, and and I would say in that case, would you stick by that standard, that moral standard, right? Because then we'll talk about legality in a minute. Would you stand by that? Killing people is wrong. What if you had a button that you could push that would send a missile into where these people are that did some of these horrific things? Would you push the button on that? Now, we're not going to answer all of the questions out there, but I think it's important that we think through these things. Are there limits to that? Well, let's take it a little closer to home. What if you're walking into work or walking into a store through the parking lot and you notice that there's a wallet in the parking lot? You pick it up and you see, hey, there's money in there. I see credit cards and some valuables. What would you do if you found a wallet? Would you bother to pick it up? Now, as I've facilitated discussions around this for years, when I ask this question, most people say, "Well, yeah, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to take it into the front desk, or I'll call the police, or I'll whatever your response is there." And as I pick that wallet up and carry it into the front desk, I'm going to guard it and protect it, maybe even more so than if it were my own property. And why would you do that? Most people say, yeah, I'm going to turn that wallet in. I think a lot of it is, well, we have a pretty good foundation of right and wrong on that. Somebody lost this, and we probably would hope that somebody would do the same thing, that they would take it in, they would turn it in, not take all the money out of it. That's what I get from most people. That's a fairly clear picture, is if there's a wallet. Well, let's change it just a little bit. You're walking in through the parking lot and you see a dollar laying on the asphalt there. What would you do then? Would you take that dollar into the front office and turn it in? We could make it $5 because of inflation, because I don't know, is it worth picking up a dollar these days? I'd still pick it up, but but you're not going to get a whole lot out of that dollar. But if it's a $5 bill, what would you do? Would you pick it up and turn it in? Now, this turns the discussion in many cases where people are like, you know, I'd probably just stuff it in my pocket. And there's a justification that goes along with that. What would be your moral justification for picking up that $5 bill and just putting it in your pocket? Or if it was a dollar, it's a dollar. Nobody's going to claim it. How do you prove that it's mine? Well, this is what we call moral justification. Is it any different, that dollar or the wallet? It's both somebody's property. And would it be right? In my opinion, it's right that I would turn that in. But it's easy to get on that slippery slope there and morally justify, right? I justify showing something is right or reasonable. I'm going to keep it because nobody can prove that that's their money or whatever else, what other justification that we may come up with. So think about that. We're going to shine a favorable light on things. I go back to my history on a number of these things. I tried to sell a vehicle that I owned. This is going back quite a few years. I had an old 1973 Ford Bronco, the old original style Bronco, and it was in fairly rough shape, and I was in need of some money. And so I thought I'm going to sell that old car. But I made a decision on this car. I'm just going to be 100% honest. And whoever asks about this vehicle, I'm going to tell them everything that's wrong with it. And you know what happened? Um, I still have that vehicle today. Nobody wanted to buy it because I was honest about it. But would it be easy to, not tell 100% of the truth about a vehicle that we're trying to sell or something to that effect? Do we morally justify our decisions or the things that we do there? Now, I choose to think that I was um, came out a little bit ahead on that one because I did the right thing. I wasn't going to tell the I was going to tell the truth about this vehicle, and I still have it today. Now that hurt for a little while because I didn't sell the vehicle, but that vehicle's now worth far more than it was back in the day when I was going to sell it. All right. So, can there be more than one right choice? That's where ethics really becomes important. If it's clearly right versus wrong, well, that's not a hard decision to make. It's when there's more than one right choice that it becomes a hard decision. That is ethics. What do we do when we're presented with more than one right choice? Well, then we've got to decide what's good, what's better, and what's best if we've got three of those. Make the best right choice. Wow, that's challenging. So how do we make good ethical decisions? Well, here's a quote by Potter Stewart. He was a Supreme Court justice back in the 80s, I believe, and he made this quote: "Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do. There may be things that are legal to do, but they may not be ethical. That's where it gets challenging. Ethical acts are legal, but legal acts may not necessarily be ethical. I think about, I like to fish. And there are things that I can legally do, and I can go and take a limit of fish every time I go out there. And I'm that good a fisherman. No, I'm not quite that good, but but I'm a pretty good fisherman, and I can catch a mess of fish. But ethically, for me, um, if it's just my wife and I at home, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to take an entire limit of fish. And that's a personal decision for me. It's ethically, I put those fish back. And most of the time I don't keep a fish, but occasionally I do. That's an ethical stand that I've taken on that. Some people say, now catch and release only. So that's where ethics gets a little bit, where we can have differences of opinion. All right. There are also factors that go into that. The law, sometimes ethics are legislated, and we're going to go through a bunch of different acts in the state of Utah where ethics have been legislated uh, for government employees and governmental entities. Our department policies may influence our ethics as well. We maybe have some guidance there, so we need to know what our policies are. And then there's our personal ethics. This is something that I stand by in my own decisions. All of these things are a factor. All right, so laws are laws created by a governing body. Our Utah legislature, like I said, has created several of these ethics laws, and we're gonna hit those quickly. Um, One big one, the Utah Public Officers and Employees Ethics Act, Title 67. And then there are corollaries for counties and municipal agencies. Basically, they're repeated multiple times. It's the same. I'm going to show county stuff today, and but realize that if you work for a municipality or a special service district, there is a corollary that goes along with that for everybody else. All right, so let's hit these, and I'm just going to hit the high points for this. County officers and just add in municipal if you work for a city. County officers and employers disclosure act. Okay, I work for the trust, governmental agency. I also volunteer as a planning commissioner for the county that I live in. Um, and that county is also insured by the trust. So we have a business relationship there. So I'm a vendor, but I'm also a volunteer or an employee. I get $15 per meeting to go to planning commission meetings. Um, could there be a conflict of interest there? Well, because of that business engagement, there is the potential for it. Doesn't mean that I have a problem just because I work for two different agencies, but it does create the potential. And so what we are legislated to do in governmental agencies is disclose if I have a potential for conflict of interest. And your employer should have a form that you sign. Generally, they're doing it annually, where we disclose any of those potential conflicts of interest that we may have. This act also lines out gifts. No gifts or loans greater than $50 in value. So if you get a hat and it's not more than $50, that's okay. Somebody gives you a pen or a donut at a training, that's okay. But if you get something, a pair of tickets to a jazz game or something like that's obvious is more than $50, that's something that would be illegal under this act. Keep going. Let's see. Oh, and no compensation for assistance in transactions. And so basically, if you're doing a side gig using your knowledge and skills of your job, you can't be paid for that except in certain situations, and you have to give notice on that. And so if you have more, believe me, there's a lot of detail on this. Please talk to your HR office, or if you have an attorney working in-house, talk with them about the specifics of that if you're doing side work. All right, I'm gonna keep going here. All right. So once again, disclosing conflicts of interest. And Utah nepotism law. What does it say? No public officer may employ, appoint, or vote for or recommend the appointment of a relative. All right. Now, why do we have this? Well, it's really to protect the people in the state, so we don't hire all of our relatives and really have an unethical situation. Maybe hire people who are not qualified for the job just because they're our relatives. Now, some of you out there are going, "Hey, we've got some people here who are relatives." Now, there are some exceptions for that if we're not supervising. So I could work in a separate department than my wife if she worked for the same organization. That would work, but you can't supervise a family member. Okay. There's also another exception for that. If you live in a rural area and maybe there's only one accountant in your county, and you live a long way from everywhere else, but we need somebody to help with our finances for our small town or our district. If there's really not another option except using family member, then you can do that. But once again, we want to be above boards and just disclose all of these things and be smart about that. Once again, under that, no public officer may directly supervise an appointee who is a relative. So that nepotism law is important. No employee may accept or retain employment if he is paid from public funds and he or she is under the direct supervision of a relative. Okay. All right. Let's keep going here. Personal use expenditures. This is one that the legislature passed several years ago. I think it was called HB 163 when it was passed. And it basically is misuse of public property. If we purchase things using our monies, taxpayer monies for our government agency, to buy things that really don't have anything to do with the agency. They're more personal related. I buy a camera that I never use for my work, but I use it personal all of the time. That would be something that would be illegal, and it could end up being a felony under this. There are a lot of teeth in this law. We've got to be really smart about how we deal with this. Otherwise, it's seen as misuse of public property. So here's the definition. Personal use expenditure means an expenditure made without the authority of law. And that last one would constitute taxable income under federal law. All right. And it primarily furthers a personal interest of the state officer or employee, or the state officer's employees, family, friends, or associates. So we got to be really smart about that. Don't be taking the backhoe home to do work over the weekend. Don't be purchasing that camera that we really don't have use for in the organization just because you want to use it for whatever project you have. We've got to be smart about that. Another one, more broad, official misconduct. Public servant is guilty of a Class B misdemeanor if, with intent to benefit himself, herself, or another, or to harm another, he or she knowingly commits an unauthorized act that purports to be an act of his or her office, or knowingly refrains from performing duty imposed by him or her by the law, or that is clearly inherent in the nature of his or office. Okay, if we use our authority that we have as a government employee, as an officer of our organization, to hurt somebody or to help somebody, and that's really the purpose of it. It's not the purpose of the organization. We can be guilty of official misconduct. So we've got to look at that. If I'm trying to stick it to somebody, or if I'm trying to help somebody out, and that's really the purpose, not doing the purpose of our organization, that's where we can get into trouble there. Receiving or soliciting bribes, even if I don't get a bribe, that I can be guilty of soliciting bribes. Okay, so and it doesn't have to be something of big monetary value to be a bribe. It could be something else. Hey, you want to get off of this offense, or you want to get that subdivision put in place. Here's what I need. Okay. Improperly disclosing or using private controlled or protected information. Some of us have access to personal information, social security numbers, and other information that, if it were released to the public or to certain individuals, could be bad for them. If I intentionally do that to harm somebody, or I just mess up in my job because I'm not paying attention to what's going on, I could be guilty of that as well. Okay. All right. Tons of stuff. Mike, I have talked a long time. Do we have anything that I need to catch up on? No questions?
Nope, you're good. No questions.
Right.
You've been chugging along and doing good.
I did put on there that we're going to be 40 minutes, and we're going to be close. All right. So how do we make the best right choice? How do we go about making the right choice? Well, that brings up an important word, important term, and that's a duty. Who do we have a duty to? Duty is a moral or a legal obligation. So if I have a child, I have a duty to that child to feed them, to make sure they go to school, to make sure that they have clothing and they have, they're warm in the winter, and those types of things. There are duties. And now that could be to our family, our children, but it could also be to our employer. As a public servant, we have a duty to the people of the state of Utah, or to the people that we serve as part of our job. So we have to ask ourselves, who is impacted? What is the impact? And who do I owe a duty to? Who am I responsible to? That's going to help us make the decision. When I've got two right choices, I'm going to look at those things. So think about who is there. Do I owe a duty to my employer? Do I owe a duty to the community? How about myself and my family? Okay, ask those questions. Another important factor that goes into that is this a short-term benefit or a long-term benefit? In general, when we make ethical decisions, if it has a long-term benefit, that's probably the better choice. If the decision that I make only benefits me, well, that's probably getting to that area where I've got to dig a little further into that. If it benefits those that I owe a duty, then that's probably the appropriate thing. In general, organizations that demonstrate high ethical standards and values are more successful. And do you agree with that? I have a quick example here I want to bring up. Years ago, wow, it's a long time ago, I worked for the Salt Lake Organizing Committee for the 2002 Winter Olympic Games as risk manager there. I was super excited about getting that job, and I did all of my interviewing basically remotely. And so my first day on the job, I went to headquarters downtown Salt Lake City. I go in, get all of my stuff from SLOC, and sit down for first day orientation. And the HR folks are up there. They're telling us about benefits. They're telling us about policies and procedures and all of that stuff. Every real job that I had that didn't involve milking cows or something on a farm, I'd always had to do a drug screen before I got a job. And so I came into this because all of my interviews and everything were remote. I came into this first day orientation thinking I'm going to have to do a drug screen sometime that day. And so to be prepared to provide a sample, I didn't use the restroom that morning. And so the training's going on, and we're pushing lunchtime. And about this time, I'm really needing to use the restroom. And so when we went to break, I went up to one of the people that were putting on the training, and I said, "Hey, are we going to do a drug screen?" And they're like, "Oh, we don't do that." I said, "Well, okay." And so I went and took care of business, and I thought, wow, I'm a little worried about that. Here we have the Salt Lake Organizing Committee, this organization that is bringing the biggest event to ever hit the state of Utah. We're going to be moving hundreds of thousands of people around the state. They'll be moving around to these venues. We're going to be doing high risk sports. Just a lot of things around this made my spidey sense go off that, hey, I really need to bring this up. I was working as risk manager for the organizing committee, and I thought, and I said, I've got to raise this up the flagpole. And so I did. And you know what happened? Well, I got shut down. I got a communication from a corporate vice president that said in no uncertain terms that I needed to knock it off, and that if I continued to push this, there was not a direct threat, but a pretty a pretty veiled threat that I wouldn't work there anymore. And it came from a corporate vice president, and I thought, okay, I believe ethically this would be the right thing, and professionally as a safety professional, that we're putting ourselves and risk as well. We're putting our organization at risk by not doing it. But the corporate VP said, knock it off. and so I knocked it off. And didn't feel good about it, but I said, all right, I've been told. Fast forward about 6 months, we had a pretty significant incident that happened. Law enforcement was involved, hit the newspapers, and our staff were involved, and there were some substance abuse issues there. Well, then it kind of blew up. Went to a big meeting with all of the corporate staff, and this guy was in the meeting, Mitt Romney. Whatever you think about Mitt, hold on, we'll we'll talk about this. This was a situation where I gained a lot of respect for Mitt Romney, his politics notwithstanding. I in this meeting, they're talking about this incident, and Mitt asks the question to the corporate vice president who had shut me down. Said, well, we drug screen our staff, right? And this corporate VP said, no, we don't. And Mitt's response was eloquently, what? and he says, why not? And this corporate VP said, do you know how many people we would lose if we did that? And this is where I gained respect for Mitt. He said, it doesn't matter. He said, this is the right thing to do, and we need to do it. And so we put the policy in place. We drug screened our staff, and this was getting closer to the Olympics too. So the potential impact was definitely greater on the organization. Guess what happened? We lost some people. Some just because the policy went out, they said, sorry, I'm not going to hang around for this. But what else happened? Well, we had the Olympics, and we did a great job, and we were able to pull off the Olympics in a relatively safe fashion, and we were successful. And I just go back to this. I think of that situation. It was going to hurt to put this policy in place, and the right decision was made. So think about that. Ethics is doing the right thing when nobody's looking. Ethics is doing the right thing even when it hurts, when it's going to hurt. Okay. So let's run through just a couple of, oh boy, I said 40 minutes. There was some plug time in there. If you guys got a couple more minutes, we'll do this. Let's just ask a couple of questions and see what you think about these ethical situations. You're a police officer and you pull over a drunk driver. Okay, part of your job. And when you get up to the car, it turns out to be the mayor. What do you do? This is an interesting question. As I've asked it to law enforcement officers around the state, they said, lock them up. There's no hesitation at all, which was great. It's, what are we doing? Well, ethically, morally, this is the right thing, because we're out there trying to protect people. And if somebody's in an impaired state, it doesn't matter who they are. They need to not be driving. Okay. Here's a few other questions. We'll run through these quickly. Your boss compliments you for somebody else's work. What do? Do you just take the compliment, or do you correct it and say, well, no, I really didn't do that? You have inside knowledge through your work that they're going to build a Costco in a certain part of town, and there's some land right next to where this Costco is that's for sale. Would it be ethical for you, with that inside knowledge, to go and snap up that land, or tell a family member you ought to go buy that property? How about taking a quote unquote sick day? Is that appropriate? Is that an ethical decision? One nice thing about getting old is I've always got an ache or pain. It's a lot easier to take a sick day because I always got something that hurts. Fudging numbers on a report to make it look better. All right. For law enforcement officers, what about free soda or coffee at a convenience store? I'm not saying these things are right or wrong, but they're ethical decisions that we have to make. I walked into a convenience store one day. I had a mug from one of our police departments in the state. Nice chief gave it to me, and I walked in and filled it up with a Pepsi, and I went up to the counter and waited for the person at the counter, the clerk, to tell me how much. He says, "You're good." I said, "No, you don't understand. I haven't paid." And and I said, and he said, "No, you're good. Get out of here." I said, "But I didn't pay." He says, "You're good." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I guess you don't have to tell me 4 times that I don't have to pay for this drink." Well, I get in my car and I'm driving down the road, and I take a drink, and as I put it down, I glanced at that mug, and it had the police department's logo on it. And I thought, I just got the cop discount. Now, I had an ethical conundrum there, right? This person mistook me for a police officer because of the mug that I had. But it gave me that thought. This organization loves to give out free coffee or sodas to police officers. Why? Because they don't want to get robbed, and they'd love to have police presence at their convenience store. They want to keep the criminals away, and having a police officer there really helps. So a little free coffee or soda does that. Now, does that make it right or wrong? I'm not saying that is wrong. However, we got to think through, what decisions am I making based on this? Is there something that I'm doing differently or showing preference based on that free soda, that free cup of coffee? All right. All right, let's keep going. I'm going to go through these because I am out of time. What about using your ability to investigate criminal history for the new neighbor that just moved in next door? Or what if your ex has a new boyfriend or girlfriend? Um, it- is it ethical to use your communication devices, your databases, to check that person out? Now, there may be some legalities on that as well. All right, so we have talked about a lot of things. I think this is one of the funner subjects to talk about, because the questions are not always black and white, and sometimes they're hard things. So what do we do to make good ethical choices? Making the best right choice. What's the best of the 2 or 12 options that we have? Not all illegal acts are ethical. So just because I can doesn't mean it's right. Um, Duty is a moral and legal obligation. Who do you owe a duty to? We all owe a duty to our employer. Um, but if they're doing something illegal, do I owe a duty in that case? Um, and the decisions require consideration of duty, and whether it's short or long-term benefit, and who is benefited from that. It's a challenging thing, but I think if we go into it with our mind open, we set some of those limits. It can be a real positive part of who we are. All right, we've covered a lot of stuff, and I apologize, I went about 5 minutes over there. I'd love to have any questions. If you guys have any questions or comments, type those in the chat box and we'll get them to you now. What do you think, Mike? Anything I missed?
No, I think you're doing great. I mean, we don't have any questions right now, so you must have covered it pretty well. But this is important, right? The stuff around ethics. And this is like Jason said earlier, this is a little bit of a switch with how we normally do our loss prevention webinars for the month. But this is a great topic to have in the can for us. And this is a really, really important thing that everybody has to deal with at the organization, no matter if they're a frontline employee who their only job is to pull the weeds now in the summertime, or if it's the city manager or the mayor, right? These are great things to have, these conversations. So thank you. This is awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Oh, one thing I did skip over was sometimes if we're a member of a professional organization, they may have an ethics policy or an ethics standard, and those are another good guideline for us to go by. They're really dialed in on the type of work that we do. So if you're a member of a professional organization like that, that's a good place to really start on some of those business ethical choices that we have to make. All right. No questions?
Nope, we're good.
Hey, All right, folks. Thank you for all you do out there. We appreciate all of your efforts in making our communities in Utah really a better, safer place. So thanks so much. Go out and have a safe day.